Christ will shine on you. So be careful to live your life wisely, not foolishly. Take advantage of every opportunity because these are evil times. Because of this, don't be ignorant, but understand the Lord's will. Saints of God, our eyes have seen the glory and the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. I see him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dew and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Brandon A.J. Davis. I'm the founder of Content Writing Service and your host for today with Conversations with Faith Leaders. Today, I am both excited and embarrassingly nervous to have a conversation with these phenomenally gifted and anointed preachers of the gospel. My special guests today include Bishop Vashti M. McKenzie, the 117th elected and consecrated bishop and the first female bishop in the 233-year history of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and she is currently the presiding prelate of the 10th Episcopal District. We also have Bishop Elizabeth Ann Henning Byfield, the 135th elected and consecrated bishop in the AME Church, and holds the distinction of being the fourth woman elected in our episcopacy. She is also the presiding prelate of the 16th Episcopal District. Dr. Dianna Watkins Dickerson is a scholar, writer, preacher, wife, and mother. She is an expert in rhetoric, race, religion, and gender, and specializes as a womanist rhetorician. I think I said that correctly. Centering on an Afrocentric approach with a goal to build womanist theory within the field of communication as a valid and vibrant standpoint. We also have Bishop Evangelist Jacquelyn Melton, who is the Associate Pastor of Vision Center Church and serves with distinction as the District Missionary, the Restoration District of the California West Coast jurisdiction of the Church of God in Christ, a preaching phenomenon, artist, graphic designer, and a full-time mother. Lastly, but certainly not least, Reverend Dr. Jamie Frederica Eaddy, who is a recent graduate from the Colgate-Rochester Divinity School with an earned Doctorate of Ministry degree. She is the founder and CEO of Thoughtful Transitions, a clinical chaplain specializing as a loss navigation specialist. She's an adjunct professor and a womanist practical theologian. Ladies, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
As I said, I am extremely nervous to have this conversation. Do we have everybody on the screen? Yes. I'm extremely nervous to have this conversation because I'm in a room with amazing preachers of the gospel. And I want to be choosing my words correctly. I did say that wrong, but I want to choose my words correctly because it has been my education and my respect for women in ministry to make sure that the words we use are inclusive. And so I'm excited to have this conversation with these preachers. I'm excited to have you here today, and I don't want to belabor the moment. I know that you are tired, you have been busy, you have been working, and so I want to respect your time, and I want to ask our first question. How important is the female voice in today's culture and climate, and has that voice in any way been cheapened for equity with men? Bishop McKenzie, you can go first.
Well, yes, of course, the female voice is important in today's culture and climate, absolutely. Just as sopranos are very important in the chorus, just as second sopranos and altos and bass and tenors, it takes every voice to make the piece work. And so it takes the female voice, absolutely, to have a place in the choir, to be able to sing from her perspective, how God works through her, talks through her, teaches through her, that it is not a myopic presentation of the gospel. Her voice is important. Now, is the other part of the question is that is the voice in any way cheapened for equity of men? I don't believe the voice is cheapened. I believe that the voice is trying to be snuffed out, or let's say turn the volume down on the voice, the quality of the voice, the quality of the preacher's voice, the quality of the prophet's voice, the quality of the voice is not diminished, all right, to in places where the church is willing to deal with racism before it deals with sexism, and doesn't want to deal with sexism, would rather deal with racism. And so while we're dealing with racism as a whole, we fail to deal with sexism. It doesn't diminish our voice at all. All you're trying to do is just turn the volume down so that the voice is not heard with clarity in pushing forward an agenda. And this is the kind of thing that culture does. What culture and society does is try to pit. Let's divide and conquer. If I can get the women fighting against the men and the men fighting against the women, then the whole issue goes out the door. So we have to be careful not to allow ourselves to be divided and to be conquered. We have to be very, very careful to be sure that men can be allies and women can be allies. And together we work together. We're not in competition with each other for whatever piece of pie is offered, but we work together to be sure that everybody gets something at the table. So I would say that the female voice is a very important part to play in church, culture, society, and community. The voice is not cheapened. They try to dull the voice, but the quality of the sound is still there.
Amen. Who's next? Who wants to jump in next? Same question. Who wants to jump in? Dr. Jamie, you're smiling, so I'm going to go ahead and call you in.
So, I mean, Bishop really just answered the question. It's a matter of diversity. So even if we look at the Black church is not a monolith, right? So there's the Black church, but there are Black churches. There are different ways that the Black church enters into culture and enters into society. And there are different voices for men in the church. So there is the male voice, but that male voice is heard in a various number of ways. I think the same is for women's voices. So of course, the woman's voice, the female or the woman's voice is important in that space. A diversity of voices is important in this space because we serve a diversity of people, right? We don't serve a single group of people. So whatever we can do to ensure that diversity happens in the spaces of faith, those spaces that we enter into to preach and to teach, is important. So yes, the woman's voice is an important part of the church. But in terms of being cheapened, I like the way Bishop put it. It's not cheapened, it's snuffed out, it's silenced. There's an attempt to block the voice, to hide the voice, to lower the volume, as she put it, on the voice. I still don't think that prevents the voice from being heard. And it certainly does not take away from the wealth of knowledge and wisdom and giftedness that God has placed within women preachers and teachers. So much shorter answer, but yes, the woman's voice is an important part of our faith tradition, is an important part of the church, and is absolutely necessary for today's culture and climate. And no, the voice is not cheapened, but in many ways we do, both male and female, both men and women, make attempts to silence the woman's voice within the church, especially from a position of leadership, right? So, but we also have to think about the fact that the same women who are in our churches are socialized under a patriarchal system, just like men have been socialized, right? So it's not just that men are silencing women's voices, it's really just a silencing or an attempt to silence women's voices, period. And that is from all of who attend the church. So yeah, the voice is not cheapened, but certainly an attempt to silence and hide the woman's voice.
Bishop Byfield, can you please respond to that question?
Yeah, I think both my sisters have responded very well. I would only add that we are a product of history. And when people don't know their history, they will draw conclusions or reach in some ways to dull, which is already in existence. And so that when God created male and female, God said, I created male and female. God created them, and he gave them the responsibility to be in charge. Them, the responsibility to multiply. Them, the responsibility to lead and subdue. So that in God's perfect universe, the woman's voice was equal to the male's voice. And when you look at especially the Hebrew Bible and even the New Testament, I mean, you see women of Zelophehad and the Canaanite woman and the woman of wisdom. And when you go into the New Testament as well, you see the woman, the persistent woman. So that in the women of Zelophehad, so the women have historically had a strong voice. And throughout history, that voice has always been challenged by people who did not understand who God created in women and did not understand who God created in them. And so that most recently, because of trends in this country, it has been the understanding by some people that women have no right. And women, many of them, unfortunately, have taken that ownership that they have no right. But the voice is not cheapened by us. The voice is dull, as Bishop McKenzie said, and it is our responsibility to make sure that from girls up that women know they have a right to speak and to articulate and to be who God has created them to be.
Evangelist Melton, how are you today? Can you please respond to how important is the female voice in today's culture and climate? And has that voice in any way been cheapened for equity with men?
Of course, the woman's voice is important. I think that that should go without saying. Again, I think even in the fabric of the question is the woman's voice important? We would never question whether or not the man's voice is important. So it is absolutely important. It is the balance. It is the counterpoint. And it is a very important perspective because through the woman, all life is existing. And so needless to say, it goes without saying that the woman's voice is important. I concur with everyone else that has said that the female voice cannot be cheapened. Any conversation that the female voice is included in is enriched for the same. And however, I do agree again that we have been silenced, or certain areas or demographics of people have tried to silence us or mute us. But absolutely, the woman's voice is important.
Dr. Dickerson?
All right. So first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for inviting all of us, and to the bishops, Dr. Eaddy, Evangelist. It's just a great honor to share on this panel with all of you. I would say, obviously echoing all the other great panelists, that many times our voices are not just repressed and oppressed, but depressed by the internalized sexism, the internalized racism that we experience, particularly as Black women, right? And I think both Bishop McKenzie and Bishop Byfield, they spoke to that. But also, too, we have to be reminded that the ways in which we interpret the Bible, particularly in this Western Christian context, is, rid of misogyny, of sexism. I mean, that is the hermeneutical lens that we take up, right? It's really married to this not just sexist, capitalist structure of oppression, but in benefiting off of the repression and depression of other folks' voices, right? So to be able to hear yourself, you have to step on someone else's neck, right? I mean, quite literally, as we see right now in our society with Black Lives Matter movement and all of those that have lost their lives to police brutality. And so I think in many ways, also too, our voices can be cheapened. The real violence is when we allow our own voices to be cheapened. And so I kind of think about different denominations. And I myself was raised in the Baptist church. And so, of course, when I shared my calling to ministry, I was called at 14, but didn't really go forth until I was in college. I got to see my chaplain at Dillard, who was a woman, and got to see myself, right? A picture of myself. And so I started to begin to like take on some confidence and say, okay, this is actually possible. Well, you know, on the other side of that, after I had to return from Dillard to Memphis after Hurricane Katrina and being in an all male dominated pulpit, that doubt started to creep back in again when the pastor of the church I was raised in was saying, you know, are you sure that you're called, right? And so I guess God is a liar for all those that are not male. And so many times I think society does, whether it's society, you know, white society, whether it's, you know, patriarchy that's within the Black church, they do cheapen that voice. I wouldn't say that the AME church is, you know, just the best. Obviously, we do see this, right? But at the same time, many women often internalize this. I know I'll be honest, and I've had to second guess myself sometimes. And, you know, until we're in spaces and creating and curating spaces where women's voices are not only validated, but are valued as virtuous, right? Then we really do get stuck in this conversation. I think the evangelist kind of spoke to it just a little bit, right? Life, not just physical life, but if we think of physical, we think of emotional, intellectual, and even our spiritual lives are taken up in the body of a woman. Had it not been for the Virgin Mary, had it not been for the Mary that preached the gospel, y'all wouldn't have anything to talk about anyway. And so we have to really peel back this, you know, very layered onion, if you will, and think about not just the ways in which society has a part in this, but also the ways in which the Black church replicates, you know, toxic masculinity. But even too, we can internalize the violence that's thrust upon us and really kind of accept it for ourselves. So I agree with everyone, what everyone has said for sure, but we must value the wisdom, the words of women, and highlight those as not just true, but as really encompassing hope and those that can really and truly be saved, just like men as well. So
let me preface my second question. I wanted a woman. I wanted specifically a Black woman to be the vice president. Kamala Harris was not my first choice. And so my question is, and I'm gonna put it here on the screen, speaking from both a socio-political and church perspective, how do you align yourself with leadership that was not your first choice?
Based on the vice president candidacy?
well, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Like I said, I wanted a woman. I wanted Val Demings. That's who I wanted. But that's not who we got. So this is who we have. And so for me, I think it's important for everyone, particularly males, to understand, and some females, because I'm a Southerner. I'm from North Carolina, and I grew up seeing women pastors, women preachers, but I also grew up in the culture where some of the hate towards women in ministry came from women, which was shocking to me. I grew up where you saw the ladies of the church, the grandmothers and the mothers of the church, who were not interested in hearing the female pastor that was on the ministerial alliance in the community. They wouldn't show up that particular night for the revival or for the Holy Week service. And so how do you align yourself with leadership that was not your first choice?
I'm still back at the part with the vice presidential candidate.
Right, Bishop. Can I start this now?
Because of that, go ahead, Dr. Dianna.
Okay.
I want to jump in that.
Go ahead.
First of all, it's such an insulting position. And it's so politics by its very nature is the bringing together of people to make decisions about the whole. It is leveraging actions. It is looking at composites and bringing them together for the whole. This notion is embedded in sexism. This, and I'm not saying you are sexist, but the question is embedded in sexism. So when Vice President Hillary Clinton ran, many of us did not raise, many of us were not in love with who she picked as the vice president. We saw it as this is who she saw was best. And we knew that the country needed a team that could work together that would reflect the whole. So we went out and voted. But when it becomes a female, particularly a Black female, these kinds of questions about it's not our first choice, or we didn't like her, or can she lead? Can women lead? Well, she has history. Well, she doesn't, she was a former prosecutor. Then all of those are usually asked when it's a Black person, but more likely when it's a Black female. So I want to see equity and change, and it didn't matter to me that it was. As a matter of fact, I'm an AKA, so of course I saluted Senator Harris, but I also saluted her because she was qualified. She is qualified and has a history of bringing change to whatever she benefits. So if you look through the history, Dr. Davis, when Shirley Chisholm ran, they said she was too ugly and did not have qualification. When Barbara Jordan was in leadership, or her voice was too strong, and she acted too much like a man. When other Black women have come forward, there's always this question about whether or not they should be the first choice in being selected. I'm glad you're asking that question, and I commend you for your honesty and your transparency. I just wish that we just didn't have to deal with whether or not she was our first choice. She is our choice. She is Biden's choice, and is a choice that's needed to affect a change in where we're heading in this country.
All right. So, of course, y'all already know that I am itching, okay? And the way my nerves are set up,
All right, go ahead, Doc.
Y'all already know.
I'm with you.
So here's the thing. So let's reel it on back. So for me, of course, I'm excited about this question in particular because my dissertation focused on the presidential campaign speeches of Shirley Chisholm, of Kara Mosley Braun, and Kamala Harris. And so for me, of course, as a rhetorician, I'm, peeling back the layers of, the language that's used, not just by the candidate, but also by society. And Bishop, you're absolutely right. She was not only, too ugly, but thrust into, this trope of the mammy, right?
That's
What's
right.
interesting is that now we see that Senator Harris, right, which I tell my students all the time, please call these individuals. They are elected public officials by their highest title received, but and we do that for men, but we don't do it for women. But I'll just leave that there for a moment. Senator Harris, yes, she's an AKA. I'm not. I am a Sigma Gamma Rho. But listen, I am going to rock the vote for Harris, Biden, okay? But what happens is that Harris has been thrust into this trope of Jezebel, of angry Black woman, right? And not only that, it becomes more and more complex about who we love, about who we say that we don't love, right? Depending on our political actions. But also, too, I think the way in which she constructed her announcement speech was very different than the accepting speech for the nomination. I think it's interesting, too, to go back to the, I guess, for me, of course, the rhetorical history of women that ran for the presidency or ran, for these different offices. And so we start with Victoria Woodhull in the late 1800s, before women even had the right to vote. Then we go on, Margaret Chase Smith, and then there's Charlotta Bass, actually, who became the vice presidential nominee for the Progressive Party in 1952, so some 20 years before Chisholm. However, with all of these women, white, Black, I think Harris is just such a strategic pick, not because she's better than Congresswoman Demings. We all love her. She's AME. But I think she's such a great choice because she really stands for this intersectional feminist, this transnational feminist ideology or this perspective, and she can kind of check so many boxes. And it kind of goes back to the way you asked the previous question about cheapening of women's voices, not just in the pulpit, but also in political podiums as well. And so I wouldn't say that her voice is being cheapened, but I will say that she definitely checks these different boxes in these very peculiar and interesting ways. However, we hear a lot from men, Black men in particular, and whereas, a lot of folks, I know y'all ladies, I respect all of you. Brandon, I respect you too, Dr. Davis. But I'll call out the sexism and the misogyny, the misogynoir, right? Moya Bailey, anti-Black specific sexism against Black women, right? I'll call it out. And so I think that the statement of saying, I don't think she was the best choice or this person was the best choice, that is inherently sexist, it's inherently misogynist. And we have to check ourselves even when we internalize these things as Black women or women of color, white women, but also too, to go back to the first part of the question, how do you fall in line with leadership that you don't particularly like or isn't your first choice? Well, as a chaplain in the military, to listen, if you don't get right, you will get left. Okay. And so there are definitely leaders that I've had to serve with beside, and you have to use a certain level of wisdom, right? To not, say too much, but also when you do say something, that it really means something as you're saying it. So I think it's really interesting, not just Black women, but Black men in particular, that are just gunning for Senator Harris and saying, well, she's not this choice. The other thing I want to pick up on that's kind of inherent within this question is that these are the better of the two evils, right? There's a false dichotomy there. It then becomes, a slippery slope. And so, right, it comes into fallacy. And so this is not so much the better of the two evils, but we are choosing between a future, right, and a hope, and the oppressive rhetorical geography that has been constructed based on the vile and malevolent rhetoric that has been birthed out of this movement of taking America to a place in which we yet benefit off of the backs of others, right? Those that are on the margins. So at any rate, I see somebody in the comments said, call it out. And I saw somebody say, Black women have always carried the weight and responsibility of saving America. And that's absolutely right. Whether it's being the wet nurse for, the white women's children, whether it's also, you can wear your little cute little hats and everything, marching on Washington. I've seen everybody saying, quote, I'm quoting, we're bringing out the pussy hats, right? That's the quote now. I didn't make it up, just letting y'all know, right? You can do that all you want to, but 56% of y'all, voted a particular way. And we have to think about what that means and how that feeds into toxic masculinity, toxic white masculinity, heteropatriarchal normativity. We have to think also about Republican motherhood, Victorian womanhood, the cult of domesticity, and what Black women can never be, and what we're reminded that we can't be, right? But anyway, y'all, you know this is the hot button for me, but I'm going to stop right there.
No, you can keep on going.
You answered it.
You can press your case, press your case, and it's interesting that it comes up in the political process, and I want to rewind it, and let me say, Dr. Dickerson, I just, I love the way you frame it. You frame the conversation in such a way that others can receive it. But I think, we're making a choice between a hope of America and anarchy, constitutional democracy, or the dismantling of democracy. And I didn't say it cute, and I didn't put all those words around it to do
Bishop,
it.
I'm trying to keep my job.
Okay, I'm with you. I'm with you. But you put it in a wonderful. I'm sitting here cheering for you. I said, yes, go ahead and say that. And I love you're an academic, and I love the language of the academy, because you are able to couch several different meanings in words in which, when we stand in front of a congregation and we are speaking truth to power, we have to say it, that we're fighting for the soul of America, and want to be sure that there is a United States for our children and our grandchildren to live in. That we want to be sure that this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, for everybody, not just for somebody. That we all have equal access to opportunities and education, and that the funding of ego projects doesn't mean defunding public education or Medicaid and Medicare, or the health of the country is not because certain diseases affect certain populations. I live in a state where it's been reported that the second in command in the state said that, in so many words, that the seniors just ought to be willing to go ahead and die.
Wow.
And you're going like, what?
Wow.
Or you hear comments like, well, only 2 to 3% of people will die if we push ahead to reopening the economy. And then I have to say, you're talking about, these are not numbers, these are people. This is somebody's mother and father, somebody's child, somebody's student. These are people, these are not just numbers. So I'm diverse. I took a left turn on the question. Let me go back to the part where it said,
Bishop, it's your prerogative. You can do this.
The part of your question that talks about how do I align myself with leadership that may not be my choice. Let me say it in the language which in the African Methodist language. How do I align myself with a congregation that wasn't my first choice to be assigned to?
Wow.
How do I align myself to serve under the presiding elder that was not my choice to serve under? How do I align myself under the leadership of the Episcopal administrator that was not my first choice to serve under? How do I align myself with steward and trustee leadership that I inherited?
You do.
That I inherited. And by virtue of their position, I need them to be in position. This is not a new question. This is not a new question. Dr. Dickerson talked about the military. It's not a matter whether you like the general or not. You have the big picture and you have commands that you have to follow. Okay? So we were taught that you may not like the person in the position, but you respect the position that they're in.
Yes, ma'am.
And so, and sometimes, yes, it's hard. You go home and talk to yourself. You go home and talk to yourself. You go home and talk to God, and then you ask God, okay, how's this stuff is supposed to work out? How is this stuff supposed to work out? But those are the lessons that we were taught. So now I have to ask you, is the intent of the question to help your listening audience and to help you align with the choice that Senator Biden made, right? Or is this a question addressed by something else? Because Senator Biden made a choice for a running partner that he felt would best fit the agenda he has, the dream, the vision for America. You don't have to work with her or him. He does. And someone he can trust, go to bed at night and not wake up in the morning and that they have turned 360 degrees away from your agenda.
Right.
Okay, so there's a difference. He made a choice for a running mate that he felt could galvanize his agenda and platform, that could galvanize the country. You have one from the East Coast, one from the West Coast. You have someone already there who knows a little bit about something about how it runs, and has also attorney general experience, and we're having attorney general issues, and we're having a whole criminal justice issues, and so he chose her.
Mhm.
And if that's your candidate, then your job is to support that agenda,
Yes, ma'am.
right? I mean,
Absolutely.
if that's what your question is, and
That's-
I'm a
that's
Delta, and
exactly
I'm supporting Peak and Green here.
Yes, ma'am.
Come
That
on,
is
Sigma Gamma Rho.
Bishop, you are correct. You are absolutely correct. That was the intent of the question. Like I said, I wanted to preface the question because I noticed when the announcement was made, there was a lot of contention. I made some noise and I quickly deleted my response. It was not, and I pray that my response was not in a misogynistic way. I want to thank Michelle Guilford, Dr. Michelle Guilford, who pointed out that even though she was not my choice, I wanted Val Demings, but I didn't get Val Demings. And so I want to say thanks to Michelle Guilford, who pointed out to me that when certain comments are made, and we're talking about using the language of culture and the church, that sometimes the language of the culture and the church can be offensive and hurtful and leave our sisters out in the cold because we're not getting the bigger picture. We're not understanding what's at hand. And I think Reverend Cheryl Moore said, and I posted her comment, that white people don't have trouble falling in line. Too often we do. And so for me, I wanted to ask the question because I wanted to make certain that I was on the right track and that others are on the right track, that we have to get in line. And you're right, Bishop. She wasn't our person to choose. This is who he chose to work with and whom he felt can help him get the job done. And so the intent of the question was to bring out, the misogyny of what's happening when we comment about someone who is not our first choice, and it just happens to be a woman in this case. But you're right, Bishop, in the life of the church, how did you fall in line with the congregation that wasn't your first choice? Certainly you not being the congregation's choice of pastor.
Or how did that congregation fall in line with the pastor that was not their choice?
That's right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
And it's two ways. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna because I know Dr. Eaddy and Evangelist Melton want to jump into this conversation. But what bothers me is that as a people, we tend to pick each other apart
Exactly.
more than other people pick each other apart. In other cultures, someone gets picked, gets elevated, gets promoted, gets elected, gets nominated, and oh, isn't this wonderful? And then when one of us gets picked, get nominated, get elevated, get something like, well, I don't know. She may not be really black. She may be black Puerto Rican, or black Eurasian, or black something, or black what's
her hair? We don't like her hair.
I don't like her hair.
Oh, right.
You know, what do you mean you don't like her hair? What does her hair have to do with getting the job done?
Right.
It has nothing to do. We tend to make African American women or Afro women, period, put us in a box and say, this is what you're supposed to look like, and this is what you're supposed to sound, and this is how you're supposed to act. We are not a one-size-fit-all people.
Right.
Period. We have different tastes, different likes, different whatever, and we're still black. And I was black and female before I was saved, but I'm still black. I love your t-shirt. I love your t-shirt.
I figured since we're black women, might as well wear the t-shirt. So it's so interesting because we don't ask this question about men. We don't figure out how to get in line when there is a male pastor that we didn't vote for, right? There were 3 people on the ballot, and we voted for person C, but person A won. We don't start asking the congregation how they're going to align themselves with this pastor. What that does for me is it just continues to sort of reinforce sexism, right? And it's a subtle way though. It's that microaggression, specifically a micro insult, right? And that's when we are questioning her ability to be in leadership, but we're doing it like, well, she wasn't my first choice. My first choice was, and we'll say Val, right? We'll say Val, she was my first choice. But the truth is, if he had picked her, the same question would be asked. It would not have settled anything. The question then would be, well, she's not quite my first choice. And we would find the 2 or 3 things that we disagree with or that we have questions about for her record. We will put those on the table. And what I find, not just in politics, not just in the corporate sector, because I've been in that space, and not just in the church, is that we couch our language very subtly, right? So if you talk about, well, oh no, I like women in leadership, I like women in ministry, but not that one. Just not that one. And we continue to do the just not that one until all of the women who were in line for the position are gone. And then we say, well, I like women in leadership. It's just none here for me to give the opportunity to, right? So when I heard that question, that was the first thing that went to my mind was, we only ask this question about women. And we try to do it subtly. It's sort of like saying, oh, she's black and she's so articulate. That's a micro insult, right?
That's right.
That's what we do when we say, well, Kamala Harris was not my first choice. That's a micro insult. Okay, so what if she wasn't your first choice, right? This is what we got. It was his first choice. And we don't even know if it's his first choice. It's the choice he presented to us. And so we fall in line because that is what, if you're going to vote, and I pray that we not voting the other way. If you're going to vote, this is who is on the ballot for you to choose. This is your person. So I just think about the ways that we use our language so subtly to continue to reinforce the sort of believed or supposed inferiority of women, even when we ask little questions like, how do we align ourselves with her or this? Because she's not our first choice. So I didn't have much to say. I think the question's been answered 10 times over, but I did want to add that we do this little thing very subtly when we ask questions like this. And even in our churches, when I said, when women come up for leadership positions, we always say, it's just, she's not the one, because like, I don't have a soft voice, and I've had this voice since I was 4 and I am 44. It probably sounded scary as a 4-year-old. It might sound a little more appropriate as a 44-year-old, but she's not the one because of this. But that's what we're doing with Kamala Harris. And it bothers me so, because the microaggressions that we deal with, the little subtle things that we might not recognize right away as sexism is what's happening to us today as well. Like, folks aren't saying, oh, I don't like women. That's not what they're saying, right? Well, some are. But we're not saying I don't like women. I don't believe women should be in leadership. That's not what we're just saying, not that woman. And we say not that woman until there are no women left. So I'll let Evangelist Jackie come in because I know we only have a little bit of time left for a couple more questions.
I have just two things to contribute to this, and I'll be brief. The first thing is that at this juncture, at this point in time, there are some conversations that we cannot afford. We don't have the luxury to have. And this is one of the points that we really don't have the luxury to argue as far as who's first, who's second, what I would prefer. When she was nominated, it was just incumbent upon us to surround her and to support her, because she is his choice, and she's a historic choice by virtue of her gender and by virtue of her nationality. So I would say that that it's okay. Of course, everyone has their opinions and their preferences, but we have to be very responsible with our critique and the conversations that we have, especially in open settings, because we are at this juncture, we just don't have that luxury. The second thing that I wanted to add is that the part that probably troubled me the most is how she was torn apart by African-American men. And it just brought, I guess it's a trigger point, it just brought up a continuing trend of Black women not being protected in spaces that they should be protected. And
say that again. Say that one more time.
that African-American women tend to be left like sitting ducks. And our men, and this is not an indictment against African-American men, but it was just something that I noticed. And that is that, we tend to be left unprotected, and not just unprotected, but also assaulted in a lot of areas. When we're catching it from every other angle, like, we have to be, I think, just more aware of the fact that that Black women need to be protected. So that's what I would say.
Absolutely. Can I, before you get to the next question, because we're talking in this open conversation, not voting because she wasn't your choice is sacrilegious. Not voting because she wasn't your choice is a sacrilege. It is an insult. You have already surrendered. You've already surrendered. One of your best protest movements is your vote.
Right.
Is your vote. And I don't need to say, this is the most important election of your life. This is, our lives at stake and all that. You already know that.
Right.
But when you say, well, I don't like either candidate, vote.
Right.
Vote. And don't use that as an excuse not to vote.
And let me just add to that as well, Bishop, that not voting is also making a declaration of the possibility of continued slavery and colonialization. And you're making a decision that you would prefer to be colonialized, enslaved, mistreated, denied rights because you don't want to vote for a woman or you don't want to vote for this woman. So it's not just a choice for some political issue. It really is a choice of where your mindset is. I would rather be enslaved for the woman.
Yeah, and I do hope that we find ways to create safe spaces for women. Karen is protected every day.
Every day.
Every day.
Bishop,
Listen.
say it again. Say
look,
that one more time,
listen.
Bishop.
If Brianna was Karen,
Oh my God.
Say
that
that. Say
issue would
that.
have been dealt with in a totally
Right.
different
Say
way.
that.
Right.
And we can go on
Absolutely.
down the line.
Yeah.
But we have to create safe spaces. Because I know our historian can go line by line by saying that Karen's voice is valued more than our voices
Absolutely.
on any given day.
On every level.
On every level, because Karen can say, he disrespected me,
Right.
and you're going to be fired.
Yes. Right.
Karen can charge you
Yeah.
with a crime that you didn't commit,
Yep.
and you go to jail.
Yep.
Just on her testimony. Just on her testimony.
And then come back, because it's already happened. It can then come back 10, 20 years later and say, I'm sorry. I was just, I just couldn't explain to my father why I was, and so I said it.
Right.
And so now, da 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 da. So we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We are valued in the sight of God.
Yeah.
And if we can find ways to create safe spaces so that women are protected, when we all know as soon as you become a leader, there's a target on your back. So we have to find wonderful ways, my sisters, to protect each other. That Bishop Byfield knows that I'm, I got her back. I know she's got mine. That if somebody has, somebody's aiming for me for something that I didn't do and didn't say, or Dr. Dickerson knows that when she publishes her dissertation and her book, we need to have the book.
I'll let y'all know.
We need to
yes,
have
ma'am.
She needs to know that the sisterhood are going to come and gather and say, "Come on, let's get this out," and not going to sit around and diss it and cut and cut it all apart. Because if she was a male, they would not do that to him. And so this is just a call. Let's create safe spaces, not only for grown people, but let's make sure that our young girls have safe spaces for them, that they are not cut down, their wings are not cut off before they have learned to fly.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Y'all go ahead.
This is amazing. Let me just say right now, I want to thank all of you women of the gospel, you preachers, you smart, intelligent women of God. I want to thank you for this conversation. I said to my male friends, I would not be speaking on this broadcast because I wanted this to be a learning and teaching moment for me. I wanted this to be a deliverance opportunity for some men to realize that they do possess some misogynistic thoughts, some misogynistic actions, and to be set free from it. Because if we are going to make any progress in our communities and society, in this fight for racial equality within the church, we're going to have to stop looking at gender, and we're going to have to start looking at the capability of the individual, and stop putting up these fences and using tradition, customs, and rules as the bars that cage us in these fences. I watched twice now the movie of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Loved the movie. At the end of the movie, they show her walking into the Supreme Court, and I don't mind saying it brought tears to my eyes. One, because she's no longer with us. Two, because of seeing what she endured and what she went through just to make sure that we have this equality in this country. And you can no longer use tradition and culture, and you can no longer use the rules as a reason for why we're having to distinguish, oh, that's a female pastor, or that's a female preacher preaching today, or we even have to still teach in the seminary to be inclusive. You should already know that it's important to use inclusive language. You should already know it's important to talk to women with respect in the way you talk to women using your words. So I just want to thank you all for this conversation. And Bishop, you helped me to segue into this third question. I want to ask, maybe statement first. Black women make up 80% of the church, yet women are undervalued and underrepresented, and are still not taught enough to lead. With young adult women in ministry watching, what is your advice?
Can I just say before we tackle this question, Dr. Davis, I think you make some great points, but just in the same way, and I wouldn't say that they're quite parallel, but just in the same way, I have a lot of white friends, particularly in the military, that say, oh, I don't see color. That can be dangerous too, to say that we don't want to see gender. And so I think it does a lot of the same violence, and it kind of produces, really like a rhetoric of erasure or politics of erasure when we don't realize that women are present. And so I do think that we have to be cautious and careful about how we critique this particular point, and that in the same way we don't erase race, right, in the conversation, we still want to highlight that. I think that some of the same rhetorical violence can take place when we kind of make these pronouncements to say we don't want to see gender either, or sex or sexuality, or all of these different things. So I just want us to be very cautious about how we think through that. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Bishop, I think you was going to make a statement. Bishop McKenzie.
Oh, I'm trying to make sure everybody else heard their voice. I do want to say, before I say something else, is that Bishop Byfield has a book that's just out, right?
Yes.
What,
the leader.
Tell us the title.
It's called The Heart of the Leader, but it is a book written by presiding elders in the AME Church who are leaders, who are elders who write from leadership, not from a female voice, but from a leadership voice. And that often when we name a woman, it has to be a woman's voice, not just a leader's voice. Yes, the book is from the heart of a leader. And thank you, Bishop McKenzie, for that's why we have each other's back. For bringing, you can get it. It will be we'll be sending it out pretty soon. But there were 20 presiding elders around the world who are women who participated in writing various stages of leadership. And I just want to also add to, because I think, Dr. Davis, we can't get past this with Dr. Dickerson, and that is that it is important for women to recognize that they don't have to fit anybody's model,
Right,
but the model that God created in them, and that you are authentically the best that you are when you are authentically who you are.
yeah.
And so I get really frustrated when I hear women saying they have to dress a certain way, women in ministry, that they have to dress a certain way, or they have to deny their femininity, or that they have to reveal their femininity in order to exist. That is an old argument that they used to kill us in early days. And so we don't need to take that ownership ourselves. Secondly, what frustrates me often is that women are now told, much like men, Black men, is that you need to isolate yourself from women, that you don't need to be seen with a lot of women, and that you need to be who you are. You need male relationships and you need female relationships in order to do that in ways in which we can. And so I just want to say that the book is out, and you can order it through the AME Publishing House, and you can also I'll send the order link up. But presiding elders who are in the book already have their copies and can sell them to you directly.
Can I jump in right here and say this?
Yes, ma'am.
In regards to the question, it's important for us to understand that sometimes the way we frame the conversation, that in and of itself is problematic. So, and what I mean by that is that sometimes we frame the conversation with the contingency or with the parameters that what men think, what they allow, what they endorse, that is what is important, or that is the prize to be gained. But oftentimes what I tell young ladies is that men are not the gateway to your destiny.
That's right.
Now, men may have or be able to grant access to certain platforms, to certain rooms, to certain circles that you may want to be in, and that for whatever the reason you identify as a level of success or as a moment that you've arrived. But when you take those handcuffs off of the conversation and understand that men are not the gateway, they are not the absolute to your destiny, your obedience to who God has called you to be and the assignment that God has called in your life. He's not going to call you to something that he's not going to equip you and has already charted the path for you to reach. And so it's entirely upon us to look at what God is calling us to do, not our own personal ambition, but what God is calling us to do, and then find out through prayer, through fasting, through consecration, through obedience to leadership, through reading his word, all of those things, to find out now what is the course that I'm to take in order for me to complete the assignment. I was taught, my pastor taught us, is that God will only anoint the authentic you that he's called you to be. He's not going to anoint anything, or he's not going to empower any other version of you that you have to become or assimilate to in order to fit in certain circles. It is absolutely and positively necessary. It is very necessary to be who you are. And because that is the truth of who you are that God anoints. It is the truth of who you are that God empowers. And the moment you step out of that to conform to something else in order to fit or be accepted into other circles and whatnot, that's the moment that you step out of the true power that will drive you to success in your God-given assignment. So that is one of the things that I tell young ladies that I'm able to mentor, that God has blessed me to mentor, is that just keep in mind that you are not, your goal is not to impress quote unquote man, but your goal is to always be obedient to the assignment that God has put on your life.
Yeah. Dr. Davis, and just to what Evangelist Melton said, so I think Bishop Byfield already talked about being authentic, and Evangelist Melton talked about those disciplines, right? Being prayerful, being in the word, all of that. But I would also let young women know that there are obstacles, right? Because I don't know that I knew. Right. I was young. So I think I was so excited about, wow, this is, I'm called to ministry. What is this thing? What does this look like? And I didn't realize that there were going to be some places along the way that there are obstacles. And some of those obstacles are set up by men, right? Like, so yes, some of those obstacles are set up by men. But that will not diminish my voice. That will not diminish my gifting. That will not stop the power or the anointing that God has over my life, right? So understanding that, but also realizing that the obstacles are a very real part of the journey. And I would also say to find that community that can challenge you to grow, that can comfort you when you are in pain, that can encourage you, that can inform you. So a group of sisters, brothers, siblings, right? I have my circle who can help me be better, who, when I don't show up as my best, will call me on it, right? They don't co-sign everything I do. They might pull me aside and say, Jay, yeah, that wasn't it, right? And so a group of people who And it might be a small group. It might only be 3 or 4 people, 2 or 3 people who can love you and help you as you take this journey, because you don't need to take the journey alone.
Right.
And to be prayerful every step of the way, but to know that there are obstacles and to find your voice and to know that over time. So when I answered the call in 97, I answered a call. I kept answering the call. So that first yes is not your last yes. And so you may, as you grow, your yes is different. And the way that God has, or the way that God will use you in ministry might be different. So also be open to that, right? And so be authentic, be open, be accountable, and don't be fooled. There are some obstacles that come along, but know that you are empowered to make it beyond those obstacles. I'll stop there and let someone else join in.
I just like to say that I think it's really important to really note just this conversation. We have 2 bishops of the AME Church on this panel.
Amen.
And, you know, so Bishop McKenzie ordained me the first time and was our bishop here in the 13th. And Bishop McKenzie, I don't know if you remember first meeting me, all of Dianna Watkins. And I went up to her and I said, hello, my name is, right? And I said, I am in the military and I am in this program and I need to do X, Y, and Z. And all of these male gatekeepers, I guess you could say, were like, no, let me talk to Bishop McKenzie for you. I don't have time for your little game that whatever you're running. Most people that know me know I'm fairly outspoken, but beyond that, I've been, so many people have failed me, not just Black men, but Black women, white women, you know, we can go on. But I'm thankful for my mom, my aunt, who are very strong women that allowed me to think for myself and not, you know, apologize for living into my authentic voice. And so if Dianna Watkins Dickerson has to get something done, I see the person that I need to talk to get X, Y, and Z done, because with, you know, the military, you're on a timeline. So they don't care about AME politics. They don't care about, you know, the presiding elder, your pastor, this, that. You have some paperwork to get signed off, and I need to sign it off. And so for me, just kind of having women up on, you know, whose shoulders I stand, that, you know, were HBCU graduates, that are, you know, in, you know, also SG Rose as well, but just in these different groups of, you know, where we can really look at the value of Black women's voices and seeing that, and then having a bishop that said, oh, okay, so what do I need to do? Right. Yeah. And not looking down at me. How dare she, you know, come to me? How dare she even, you know, talk to me? And so I just want to point that out in my own experience with Bishop McKenzie, but also Bishop Byfield. I remember, I think it was a couple of years ago during annual conference, and however the order was, we were sitting next to each other, and she was just so lovely and, you know, just so kind and so welcoming. And then just seeing them interact even on this panel, right? So many times women, particularly Black women, are pitted against each other. And I would just like to highlight how I've seen these women interact just now, and also how I've interacted, or, you know, and they've interacted with me. And it's just really been a beautiful thing. And I think that far too often we speak about the horizontal violence that takes place, and we don't highlight what's really going on. So I'd like to highlight that. And then, of course, encourage young women or older women that are watching, you know, take charge of your own voice. If God called you, that's it, that settles it. Don't apologize for who you are. I don't apologize for being, you know, 100%. I'm an Aries. I am all or nothing. And so many times I think when I did apologize for who I was, or I did try to, you know, kind of cower down, God was not only disappointed with me, but I took opportunities away from myself. And so one thing that I had a military chaplain tell me, never self-eliminate. Never self-eliminate. So many times we as women, we as Black women, we as Black folk in general, we eliminate ourselves from the equation because we don't think that we're good enough. We don't think that our voice, who cares? I mean, you know, Dr. Eaddy, you said, you know, my voice was this, your voice is beautiful. And so we have to just give our own selves a hand clap of praise, a pat on the back, because God made you who you are for your assignment, as I heard the evangelist say as well. This is your assignment, not anyone else's. And once we start getting out of our own lane and start trying to, you know, revoke our own sound of the genuine, right? Then we start to even revoke or throw away the calling that God has designed for our life. So I would just like to highlight those things.
Can I get the two bishops to provide some advice to the question? Can we get the two bishops to respond with advice to young women who are watching today?
So that Bishop McKenzie will be last. I'll go with just a couple of points. I salute all of the panelists. I would say I wrote a workshop that I did for women in audience for years, and it was my intent to publish it during the pandemic. Pray for me that I get it done. But it's called How to Negotiate the System. And first, you have to know it. You have to know what the system is. You have to know how it operates. You have to know who's in it, who makes decisions, the best timing. Secondly, you have to know how to survive it. And in order to survive it, you have to know it. And so to survive it, you have to have relationships with people. You have to have a strong prayer life. You have to have the ability to negotiate and to understand that negotiating the system is not inherently evil. What is evil is the evil practices that we use to negotiate the system. Negotiate the system is what God gives you as the journey to get through the process. And then you have to find a way to thrive in it. And thriving in it is a level. I love what Bishop McKenzie has used as her district theme, Godfidence, that you have to have Godfidence. You have to have confidence on what God has promised you and to do that. So that I would say, with all the other things that my sisters have said, is that you have to know it. You have to know how your particular system operates. You have to know how to survive in it, and you have to know how to thrive through it. The last part was that several years ago, there was an incident, I won't go to it, in the church where women were told that they had to wear their hair covered, and it was a big part. Well, I reacted to it, and I reacted to it not intentionally. It just was this emotional reaction to what I call sexism. My brother, Bishop Henning, was there, and so when I sat down, he turned to me and he said, "Did you have to do that?" And I said, "Yeah." It was just second nature. Later, when we discussed, he never really said it, but publicly he said, white people can't tell Black people how to operate and respond to oppression. And men can't tell women how to respond to oppression.
Right.
And so you have to learn how to thrive in it, and you have to find your own way of thriving in it. That's healthy. Richard McKenzie?
Yes, and I agree with you, Bishop Byfield, finding your way through and your own way, and the way that works for you. And I've got a story about one of them head covering incidences too. As a bishop, giving communion in an annual
Bishop,
conference.
can you tell that story?
You want me to tell a story?
Please tell that story, Bishop.
I'm closing the annual. We're opening the annual conference, and when we do so, it's communion. And of course, the tradition is in effect. The altar is dressed in white. We're all in white robes, and we're getting ready to administer the, getting ready to go through the communion ritual. And the head stewardess comes up to me and says, "I have a hat for you." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Because your head has to be covered for communion." And I looked at her, I said, "But I'm the preacher." I said, no, I have a hat for you. And I look at her, I said, "But I'm the bishop. I'm administering communion." And so the stewardess, the stewardesses are all lined up in every aisle, and they have doilies. And I'm looking at all these doilies, right? So that meant that every woman who comes to the communion table is going to have a doily on their head, right? And so I'm mentally counting these doilies and counting the women who do not have hats on, right? So they're going to run out of doilies. And so the last stewardess is holding a box of tissues.
Sure.
So we go through the ritual. We're going through the ritual. And periodically I have to turn around and say, "No," because they keep trying to put this hat on my head.
Wow.
No. And no. And no. And so they ran out of doilies, right? They start putting the tissues on the lady's head, right?
Bishop.
The fan, the church fan. Every time
Look at God.
they put a tissue
Look at
on,
God.
that fan blew them tissues off.
Oh my
And so
God.
now you have a stewardess. So I'm getting ready to go. I'm up on my feet now, off my knees, up on my feet. I'm getting ready to go serve. And this stewardess is trying to put this doily on my head. And every time it does, the fan blows it off. So she tries to put it on and the fan blows it off. And tries to put it on, the fan blows it off. Finally, I turned her, I said, "Have you finally gotten the point that God does not want this doily on my head?"
That's right.
Oh my gosh.
And so it happens. It doesn't matter whether you are licentiate, you're at the diaconate level, you're an elder, you're the pastor of the church. It happens, and it could have been handled another way. I mean, I could have been. I just could have, given her the eye. We all got an eye. Give it that look that everybody knows, like that. Stop right there. But trying to help them to get to that point of understanding without disrupting the sacredness of the sacrament that we're getting ready to do. But I look at it that God figured that out. That all these doilies were not going to stay on heads, and all this tissue, it wasn't going to happen. Because that fan kept on going. It kept removing all of that stuff. So 3 things. Let's get back to the question. Three things. Every issue that you have in your ministry, your pastorate, or as a presiding elder, as a bishop, is not a gender issue.
Mm-hmm.
So every time something happens, it's not always about sexism. Most of the time, it's about power and authority. Who's in charge? And so when other people are used to being in charge until you arrive, some of those issues are about power and authority. Who's in charge? Who's in charge of the church? Who's in charge of the district? Who's in charge of this? And so every issue is not a gender issue. Try to approach it to understand you're dealing with the issue, whether it's a power issue or whether it is a gender issue. And then secondly, things do happen. Stuff happens. Stuff happens that'll hurt your heart. It really will. I used to tell God, I said, "You did this. You called me because you wanted me to have a better prayer life." And so things will happen to you, and things will happen with you. And some of those things happen, not all of them. Some of those things happen that I have found that have developed skills in me that I didn't get naturally. Some people it's just like, ducks to the water. They got it. And we all didn't get the whole package. So I found out that some things happen that developed stuff in me that I didn't get naturally that I would need later on. Okay. So stuff happens, and then a couple of years later, you look and say, "I've seen that devil before. We know how to deal with this one." Okay.
Right.
Then The other night we were talking about access. Of course, after Hamilton, I want to be in the room where it happens. Everybody wants to be in the room where it happens. And in our ministry language, we want access to pulpit, access to points in ministry. And the first step of access is performance. It's performance. It's being able to maximize your gifts in such a way that, number one, God is honored and the people are blessed. Because it's very hard to argue with success.
That's right.
You understand? It's very hard. It said, don't ask me what I'm doing, just look to see what is being done. I don't like women in ministry. Oh, I don't like what she's doing over that church. Where there are about 2,500 people that's showing up every week.
Right.
I don't believe women are called to this. She has just built one church and she's paid it off. She's getting ready to build an annex. Oh, I don't believe God's called women to preach and preside and all of that. 250 souls gave their lives to Christ.
That's right.
Look at the fruit. Look at the fruit. Look at the fruit. So instead of focusing on the naysayers and those who stand against you, and they will, and those who got something to say about everything, they're going to talk about your hair, the color of your skirt, your robe, too short, whether you wear stockings, you don't wear stockings, whether you wear dreadlocks, whether you wear this. They're going to say all of that stuff. Don't focus on that. You're supposed to be focusing on what God has called you to do to produce the fruit. That God produces fruit through you. So even if they never say amen to your stuff, if God says amen to your stuff.
That's right. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Even if they wait till you dead and gone before they say, wow. If God has said, wow. If you made Jesus stand up on the right side of God and look over and go like, there she go. Atta girl. Yeah, you want to get some flowers while you're living. But if that doesn't happen, we're here to make God smile. We're here to honor God. We're here to produce fruit and win souls for the kingdom. We are to equip the saints for service. We are to develop disciples and not members. Hello. Develop disciples and get them out on the field. So that what happens when your congregation, that's a part of our Methodism. We come to worship, we leave to serve. That the people that you grow and raise up on the inside go out and produce fruit on the outside. I agree with all y'all. I love the phrase never self-eliminate.
Yeah, I love it.
I love that. Y'all write that down in your diaries tonight. Put in your journal. Don't eliminate yourself. I've heard so many women eliminate themselves in and out of the church. I don't think I'm going to put my application in for this promotion. Why not?
Put it in.
Why not?
Yeah.
The worst could happen is they say yes. Then you have to do the job. Don't self-eliminate. Stand when God tells you to stand. Speak when God tells you to speak, and do the job. Do the work.
I want to say thank you so much. This has been, I wish I had more time to share with you and to ask the other question that I have, but I want to be respectful of the time. We've been here for a good while, and this has been an amazing conversation. And I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your schedule to share with me in this conversation. I have asked every guest this question, and so I would like to ask all of you the same question, and we can just go down the road. Define unholy silence. And I'm going to allow Bishop McKenzie to be last. So so Dr. Watkins, Evangelist.
Ask that question first. What is what? Unholy?
Define unholy silence.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm going to ask that Dr. Watkins, Evangelist, Dr. Eaddy, and then I'm allowed the bishops to go last. You're muted.
Whoops, sorry about that. Thank you again, Dr. Davis, for having us. To all of you, ladies, leaders, I am just so impressed and so thankful to share with you all. But I would think through unholy silence, really through Zora Neale Hurston, not just her texts, Their Eyes Were Watching God, or Moses Man of the Mountain, all of her different texts. But she has a phrase that's pretty well known. If you're silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. And I love that phrase because so many times we are silent about our pain. So many times we are silent about the different, as I said earlier, the rhetorical violence or even the erasure that we suffer. And I would love to share stories, but the one I will say quickly is that when you don't stand up for yourself, people will define a narrative for you. I heard Bishop Cousin sharing this, or a quote similar to this, yesterday in the African Methodist Episcopal Church history book companion series that we did yesterday. And basically, you don't want folks to define your own narrative. You want to take charge of your own voice. So anytime that you are silent about your pain, anytime that you are silent about any violence done against your body, your personhood, then you are being silent about the divinity that is running through your veins. We were created in God's image. So I would just encourage all to think through that phrase. Don't be silent about your pain, because they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. So I will leave you with Hurston's quote.
Evangelist Jacquelyn Melton.
No, you didn't.
He did. Absolutely did. First of all, again, I am, like everyone else, just incredibly honored to share this time with all of you. Thank you, Dr. Davis, for the invitation. I would say that unholy silence is when you refuse to speak in areas that God has called you to speak in. Whenever you are silent about something that God is vocal about, then it is unholy silence. When God speaks, we have a moral obligation, a spiritual obligation to cry loud and to spare not, and to lift up our voices like a trumpet. And we are to call out injustice. We are to call out misogyny. We are to call out those things that God has been explicitly loud about. And so when we choose to be quiet and to mute our own voices for the sake of the comfort of other people, it then becomes unholy.
Dr. Jamie.
So when I think about unholy silence, I think two things. First, the book that I had to read in class, which looked at how the Catholic Church sort of basically downplayed and made provision for leadership to continue even while abuse was taking place, right? So from that perspective, I enter into unholy silence as what Dr. Dianna and Evangelist Melton just said, but the willingness to not only silence your own voice, but to allow what is not righteous to occur so that others' voices are silenced. Anything, and that dishonors God, right? So it's unholy. It dishonors God. And there's one thing when I think about unholy silence, and I think about your last question together in terms of what we would tell young women, based on the responses that both bishops had and Dr. Dianna and Evangelist Jackie had as well, that part of not being silent is also speaking about the emotional, not just the spiritual, but the emotional and the physical violence that people, right, encounter every day, whether that is in the corporate space, whether that is in the congregational space, whether that is even in our homes. And so finding ways to ensure that your voice is heard, even if that means telling your story to yourself, right? So not even lying to yourself, because sometimes we will try to make ourselves believe a certain story, or we'll be silent even when we should be speaking to ourselves. And so unholy silence, refusing to allow your voice to be silent, but also those voices that are around you that are trying to make you silent, those voices that are around you that allow systems of injustice to be enacted upon you. That is unholy silence, because it dishonors God. And at the end of the day, finding ways to use our voice, but to also speak with our bodies, right? So that we are fully heard. So I'll stop there and give it to Bishop Byfield.
Again, Dr. Davis, as with the others, we are grateful for this conversation. This is the third one that I've had in 3 weeks that dealt with women. And I am grateful to continue this discussion, and particularly led by a male, which brings a whole different perspective. And I'm honored and delighted to be with all of the panelists, and certainly my big sister in the Episcopal State Bishop Vashti McKenzie. Unholy silence is knowing, for me, is knowing the truth and suppressing it or denying it for you or for others. And allowing evil to exist, but not acknowledging it, or again, working to suppress it, even when it hurts yourself and others, and participating in any form of evil without repentance. So, seeing the example that has been used previously, I was raised, I was a girl who was molested and abused sexually for many years, and did not tell my mother until I was 11, and some of her boys almost, she reacted to it, but at the same time that she dealt with it, she said to me, "Don't talk about it." And it took me many years to understand that how I wrote and how I preached and how I saw things in the Bible and things in life had some genesis with those years of sexual molestation, that it was also that as I pastored, that I saw when I would preach a certain sermon, I knew that it was going to increase my time with people, because they would come and say to me, these things happen to them and they have been silenced about it. And so even as an adult, people would say to me, "Don't talk about it because you don't want to be that woman minister."
I was told that
Would tell that you were molested as a child. And so unholy silence is knowing the truth, but suppressing it for yourself or for others. It's allowing evil to exist, but you don't acknowledge it for yourself or for others, and to participate in it without repentance, so that you must then, if you're not going to participate in it without repentance, you also must have to work for restoration and healing.
Bishop McKenzie.
Yes. I would say ditto, and try not to repeat what has already been said. But unholy silence is not preaching what God tells you to preach. And when a prophet's mouth is closed and the prophet refuses to open, that is unholy silence. Period.
That's it, Bishop.
This has been an amazing conversation. I want to again thank Bishop Vashti M, McKenzie, Bishop Elizabeth Ann Henning Byfield, the Reverend Dr. Dianna Watkins Dickerson, Evangelist Jacquelyn Melton, and the Reverend Dr. Jamie Frederica Eaddy for being a part of Conversations with Faith Leaders. I would also like to take a moment of privilege, and that is to honor the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. In 2017, she said to the BBC, "I am optimistic in the long run." A great man once said, "The true symbol of the United States is not the bald eagle, it's the pendulum. And when the pendulum swings too far in one direction, it will go back." I would also like to send my condolences to Dr. Sabrina Ellis, who lost her husband, Archbishop Jesse Delano Ellis II, who is a personal mentor to me and a mentor to many people in the worldwide church. And so we offer our prayers to her in the passing of her husband, the pastor of the Pentecostal Church of Christ, the Pentecostal Temple Church of Christ in Cleveland, as well as to the family of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We offer our prayers. That's all for the week. It is our duty to create opportunities that offer equality and justice. We must begin now building inclusive communities that reflect individual uniqueness as well as celebrate our communal bonds as we together reshape the social consciousness of America. My name is Brandon A.J. Davis, host of Conversation with Faith Leaders, and we look forward to seeing you on next week, where our special guest will be Matthew Kim, Ph.D., who was the author of Preaching with Cultural Intelligence. Until then, stay blessed.
The roof on the American dream is on fire. The roof on the Church of Jesus Christ is on fire. And we don't need no water. I think we need to let it burn. As the song says, burn, baby, burn. America needs to burn off its racism, burn off its hatred, burn off its self-complacency, burn off its self-righteousness and self-aggrandizement. This country doesn't belong to one particular race of people.